I never thought I'd be the kind of person telling this story. You always think these things happen to other people, not to you, but let me take you back to where it all began. The moment my world started to crack. It was small at first, a gut feeling. You know that quiet little voice in the back of your mind that whispers when something isn't right? My wife had started acting different. She was distant, distracted. She'd glance at her phone and smile in ways I hadn't seen in a long time. When I asked about her day, she'd brush it off or change the subject. At first, I tried to convince myself I was imagining it. Maybe she was just stressed. Maybe I was being paranoid. But night after night, I lay awake wondering why my heart felt so heavy. Then there were the late nights at work. Too many of them. And the coworker's name that kept slipping into conversations, like he was just always there. I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to admit that the woman I loved, the one I'd built my life with, could be hiding something like that from me. But deep down, I knew. And that was the beginning of everything that followed, including the karma that would come for them both, in ways none of us could have seen coming. I remember the exact moment my suspicion became reality. I had stayed late at work myself one evening, not because I needed to, but because I couldn't face the empty silence of our house anymore. When I finally drove home, something told me to take a different route, and as I turned down a quiet street near her office, there they were, my wife and her coworker, standing too close, laughing in a way that didn't belong to strangers or even casual friends. Then, he brushed a strand of hair from her face, and she didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned in. That image burned itself into my mind. The streetlight above them, the way she looked at him like I didn't exist anymore. My heart felt like it cracked wide open. I didn't confront them, not that night. I just sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel, feeling a storm of emotions. Rage, heartbreak, disbelief. And that's when the decision took root. I wouldn't lash out. I wouldn't beg or plead. I'd let karma take its course. Because deep down, I knew no betrayal goes unanswered forever. What came next? Let's just say, fate had its own way of balancing the scales, and neither of them saw it coming. In the days that followed, I carried the weight of what I'd seen like a secret too heavy to bear. I went through the motions, smiling when I had to, speaking only when necessary. Inside, though, I was breaking apart. Every glance at her felt like a reminder of what she'd done, and every word from her felt hollow. But here's the thing. I didn't want a messy confrontation. I didn't want to give her or him the satisfaction of seeing me shattered. I wanted them to think they'd gotten away with it. That's the strange thing about betrayal. It makes you see everything through a different lens. Every kind gesture from her felt fake. Every excuse she gave felt rehearsed. She'd come home late again, saying she was working on a big project, and I'd nod, pretending to believe her, while inside I felt the sting of each lie. I started documenting things, quietly, carefully. Dates, times, messages she tried to hide. I wasn't gathering evidence for a fight. I was gathering it for something bigger, a plan. Because if karma was going to come for them, I realized maybe I could give it a little nudge. What I didn't expect was how fast everything would start to unravel, not because of me, but because of their own arrogance. And when it did, it was like watching a storm destroy everything they'd tried to build in the shadows. It's strange, looking back, how quickly their little secret world began to fall apart once I stopped reacting. I think they mistook my silence for ignorance. They grew bolder. My wife smiled less at home, but she'd light up whenever she checked her phone. I noticed the way she dressed differently for work, the extra care she took that wasn't for me anymore. And her coworker? I learned his name, his habits, his favorite bar. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I wanted clarity. I needed to understand who she had traded our life for. What I saw shocked me. This man wasn't some charming prince. He was reckless, arrogant, and cruel in ways she couldn't yet see. Then, karma began its quiet work. He started missing deadlines at work because he was too focused on sneaking around. His boss noticed. The promotions he bragged about never came. And my wife? She began to see him for who he really was. Not a savior, but a sinking ship. I watched as the tension grew between them. The stolen moments became arguments. The excitement faded, replaced by stress and disappointment. She didn't know I saw it all. She didn't know I had already accepted that our marriage was over. But I wasn't going to leave quietly. No, I wanted them both to face what they'd done, in the most unexpected way possible. And that moment was closer than they could imagine. I remember the exact night everything changed. She came home late, again. But this time, she didn't even try to lie about a work meeting. She walked through the door, exhausted, disheveled, and carrying the weight of the poor choices that were finally catching up with her. I could see it in her eyes. We sat in silence at the dinner table. She picked at her food, and I could feel the distance between us, like an ocean that no words could cross. The woman I once knew was gone, replaced by someone I barely recognized, and I knew, in that moment, that it was time. I calmly looked at her and said, "You don't have to pretend anymore." Her face froze. The color drained from her cheeks, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. Not because I was angry, but because she realized I had known all along. She stammered, trying to form excuses, but I simply stood up, walked over, and placed the folder I had prepared on the table. Inside were copies of messages, photos, times, dates, all the proof of what she thought she'd hidden so well. "I'm not here to fight," I said quietly. "I'm here to let you go." Her world started to collapse right then. But what she didn't know was that karma was only getting started. The storm that was coming would leave neither of them untouched. After that night, things between us became eerily quiet. There were no more lies, no more cover-ups, just silence. She moved through the house like a ghost, and I let her. I was done saving what she had already shattered. But outside our home, the consequences of her choices began to unfold faster than either of us imagined. Her coworker, the man she'd risked it all for, had his own skeletons. Turns out, I wasn't the only husband he'd disrespected. Word got around their office. The whispers started, and soon, his polished reputation crumbled. HR launched an investigation after a complaint was filed. Not by me, but by someone else he'd wronged. My wife got caught in the fallout. She was seen as part of his mess, and just like that, her career, the one thing she thought she could count on, slipped through her fingers. Karma didn't stop at their jobs. Their affair, once thrilling, became their prison. They were no longer sneaking around. They were exposed, judged, and left with no one to turn to but each other. And without the secrecy, the excitement was gone. All that was left was regret. I watched quietly as they tried to salvage what was broken, not realizing they were standing in the wreckage they had created. And as they struggled, I had already taken my first step toward rebuilding my own life, stronger, wiser, and free. In the weeks that followed, I focused on myself for the first time in years. The weight I'd been carrying, the hurt, the betrayal, the endless questions, started to lift. Every morning, I woke up with a little more clarity, a little more strength. I poured my energy into my work, my friends, and rediscovering the passions I had abandoned while trying to hold together a crumbling marriage. Meanwhile, I heard bits and pieces about their lives through mutual connections. The relationship that had once been so thrilling for them? It was falling apart. Without the secrecy, without the stolen moments, they were just two people left with the ugly truth of what they'd done. The tension, the arguments, the guilt, it consumed them. The coworker? He lost his job. His wife filed for divorce and took everything. My ex? She was forced to resign in shame, unable to face the colleagues who once admired her. They tried to cling to each other thinking they could build something out of the destruction they caused. But karma wasn't done. I didn't need revenge. I didn't have to lift a finger. The universe had a way of setting things right, and all I had to do was step back and let it happen. And while they fell apart, I started to rebuild. I wasn't the broken man they left behind. I was becoming someone stronger. As the days turned into months, I barely recognized the man I used to be. The one who had stayed up at night wondering what he did wrong, questioning his worth. That man was gone. In his place stood someone who had learned to let go. But karma, oh, it wasn't quite done with them. The coworker. He tried to pick up the pieces of his life, but doors kept closing on him. No company wanted to be associated with his name. His own family distanced themselves, embarrassed by his choices. As for my ex-wife, the support system she had once counted on evaporated. Friends she thought were loyal stopped returning her calls. Even her own parents, disappointed and ashamed, kept their distance. They tried to move in together, thinking they could start fresh. But without the adrenaline of sneaking around, they were just two broken people facing the consequences of their actions. Arguments became daily occurrences. Money became tight. The dream they had chased turned into a nightmare neither of them could escape. And me? I found peace in small things. Morning coffee without the heaviness in my chest, long walks where I could breathe freely again, laughter with friends who truly cared. I realized I didn't need to get even. Life had done that for me. And far more poetically than I ever could have planned. The strange thing about healing is that it doesn't announce itself. One morning, I simply woke up and realized I wasn't angry anymore. The weight on my chest, the heaviness that had followed me like a shadow, it was gone. I didn't need to hear apologies from them. I didn't need explanations or excuses. I had found peace on my own terms. Looking back, I saw how much of myself I had given to a relationship that didn't deserve it. But I also saw the strength I had gained from surviving it. One afternoon, I crossed paths with my ex-wife unexpectedly. She looked tired, worn down by everything she had lost. There was no satisfaction in seeing her like that, just a quiet understanding. I nodded, she looked away, and that was it. No dramatic confrontation. No bitter words. Just the final, silent acknowledgement that we were two people from different worlds now. I had moved into a small, sunlit apartment. I filled it with plants, books, and things that made me happy. Slowly, I began traveling again, reconnecting with old friends, and embracing opportunities I once would have been too distracted to notice. Closure wasn't about watching them fall apart. It was about realizing I didn't need them to rise. Looking back now, I almost don't recognize the person I used to be, the one who stayed up at night consumed by betrayal, wondering why I wasn't enough. That chapter is over. I no longer define myself by what they did to me. Instead, I define myself by what I've built since. I poured my energy into things that fed my soul. I started volunteering, mentoring young people who were struggling to find their way. I launched a small side business, something I'd always dreamed about but had put off for someday. That someday finally arrived. The friends who stood by me became like family. The loneliness that once felt so crushing was replaced by meaningful connections, real, supportive, and honest. I traveled to places I'd only seen in pictures. I watched sunsets that reminded me the world was still beautiful, no matter what had happened. And the best part? I learned to trust again. Not blindly, but with wisdom. I met someone who showed me that love doesn't have to hurt. Someone who values honesty, who chooses kindness. Karma took care of the past. I chose to focus on the future. And if you're listening, feeling lost after betrayal, let me tell you this. You will rise too. The pain doesn't get to have the last word. You do.